Normally, when I produce a video like this, I open up with a bit of history about the game I'm about to play, in order to have some context for the footage that you're about to see. Not this time, kids. This time, we're going on a journey, and in order to really truly capture the bizarre, fever dream atmosphere of this game, Cytadela, then we're going to just have to dive in blind. I'm not going to waste any time, or give you any preview footage before stepping in, because let me tell you kids, this game is wild, and even more so when you have no idea what you're in for. To start off with, the 5-minute long intro movie. Yes, kids, 5-minute long intro movie details how the crew of the spaceship X-16 were suddenly delivered top-secret instructions to divert course and head towards a planet that doesn't appear on any galactic charts. Apparently, a super-secret government black site known as the Citadel has gone radio silent, which has the government obviously worried. Your mission is to investigate whether or not the Citadel has been compromised, and if it has, to detonate what's called an annihilation bomb within the Citadel and leave no survivors. One thing that I would like to mention right now is that Cytadela is the Polish title of this game, and that it translates to Citadel. Multiple sites online refer to the game interchangeably as both Cytadela and as Citadel, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to refer to the game strictly as Cytadela, if only to prevent confusion with The Citadel, a 2020 retro shooter from Do Kuramori, which somehow oddly feels somewhat similar to what Cytadela is doing here, but that's besides the point. Your ship approaches the planet with the Citadel, but when a mysterious energy field shuts down the X-16's defensive systems, you, the player character, and your co-pilot hop on board a small scout ship to head down on a recon mission to get a heads up on what you're dealing with. Of course, as you're headed down to the surface, a rocket whizzes past the scout ship and collides with the X-16, destroying it instantly. With little to no resources, you're forced to land the scout ship on the surface of the planet below, but the rough landing damages the scout ship and your co-pilot is killed. So now it's just you, the sole survivor of the X-16, on what is basically a suicide mission to destroy a secret government facility gone rogue. I can't emphasize enough the level of polish here on display with this opening cutscene. Cytadela, spoiler alert, was developed for the Amiga 500, a computer which I know little to nothing about, but imagine seeing a cutscene like this with voices and sound effects on a 386 back in the day. It would be mind-blowing. It's still mind-blowing even now. The story setup here is simple yet effective. Dropping in on a secret science lab that is probably performing experiments that go against the laws of nature and man to such an extent that the government has given you the green light to literally kill everyone there to keep its existence a secret is one of the most hardcore intros that I can think of. Plus, this was developed by Polish studio Virtual Design, so we're adding a layer of Slavjank and existentialism that only Eastern European countries can provide. But we're here, we've landed, and now we need to make our way through the first 2 maps of Cytadela, through an area known as the Dungeons. But before we do, let's get a load of the main menu and the sweet main theme. Oh, that's the stuff. The menu is bare bones basics. Choose your difficulty and window size and the level of graphical detail, or load your game, and that's about it. Difficulty choices are also simple, easy, or hard. Now, side note, your choice of difficulty is not saved with your save file. Every single time you boot up the game, you need to select easy difficulty if that's what you want, because otherwise the game will default to hard no matter where you load into. And whatever the setting is when you load your game is what the game will provide you with. I didn't know this for a long time, so I ended up playing a lot of the game on hard, unintentionally, which doesn't make a huge difference. Oh, but boy, it can end up fucking you over if you're not aware of it. Okay, no more teasing. Let's enter the dungeons. Alright, so, you kids are probably wondering what the hell you're looking at. Cytadela is divided into 8 specific zones. The first zone is the dungeons, with 2 maps to navigate through before we can leave them. The rest of the zones will all have 3 maps that we'll need to explore, except for the final zone, which only has 1 map. We'll talk about those in just a minute. Cytadela's gameplay consists of very Wolfenstein-inspired maps, with twisty, labyrinthine hallways, switches that activate doors, colored keys to unlock specific doors, and teleporters which will either beam us to a different spot on the map or provide as an exit for the map itself. Doors that are unlocked will open automatically as we approach, just like in Quake, so if a door doesn't open, we'll need to track down the switch that opens it. Then again, some doors only operate one way, so if you step through a door, there's like a 50-50 chance that it won't allow you to go back through it, and you'll have to explore the rest of the map for a pathway back around. Simultaneously, activating a switch isn't always a guarantee that you've opened up something somewhere on the map. You see, certain switches will actually lock doors, preventing your progression. So if you're running around flicking every single switch that you see in front of you, that might actually cause you more harm than good. And considering the actual fucking intensive size of some of these maps, you might get real lost trying to remember which switches you've switched and which switches switch doors. Fortunately, Cytadela has a fairly robust map that you can bring up by pressing tab. Each square on the map gets filled in as you cross that section of the floor physically, not by sight. It felt a little tricky to figure out how I was filling in the map because there were times when I felt like it actually did follow my line of sight, but I digress. How the map is revealed is less important than how you navigate with it. You'll see a little compass down here in your HUD. This is extremely important. Every map is built around cardinal points, and if you want to make your way around these sometimes mathematically complex maps, you'll need to reference your compass heading with the map itself in order to remember where you are, where you've been, and where you want to be going. Since we just mentioned the HUD, let's look down here. You've got your health, cleverly labeled as NRG, energy. Your health can be refilled with health pickups and can reach a max number of 999, something that is not only very possible, but oftentimes very necessary. You've got a heartbeat monitor, which basically measures your character's stamina. Long story short, taking damage of any kind, including running into walls. Yes, running into walls deals damage to your character, but only on hard difficulty. Your heart rate here will increase, and the higher your heart rate, the more winded your character is, so the slower they move as a result. So, if you somehow find yourself in a deadly crossfire and you're taking hits from all sides, there's a strong chance you might not be able to move fast enough to get out of harm's way, and you'll simply just fucking die from being too tired to run. And running is kind of a generous descriptor. You move at a steady, slow pace with no run button to increase your speed. There are temporary speed boost pickups that you can find sometimes that will increase your pace, shaped like syringes, so I think our boy here is taking steroids. But on the opposite end of the spectrum are literal bottles of booze that immediately make your character drunk as fuck. You'll struggle to move, your view will shake with your character's stumbling movements, and the effect lasts way too fucking long for its own good. And sometimes, the devs will place these bottles in hallways that you have to travel down, meaning that you're forced to imbibe and suffer the side effects, hopefully staying away from combat until you're sober again. Next to your compass is your weapon indicator and ammo counter. Now, at the start of every map, you'll see a little hand icon, which means that you're not holding anything. You'll need to manually equip a weapon at the start of each map if you have one in your inventory, which is fortunately as easy as pressing 2 through 7 on your keyboard. There are 6 weapons total to collect in Cytadela: the pistol, shotgun, machine gun, flamethrower, aka the flamer, rocket launcher, and power bolter. The first 3 weapons are all hit scan based. The second 3 are all projectile based. Each has a different range, and as we'll find out later, some enemies are gonna be immune to certain weapons. Oh, and while we're talking about weapons, you only get a certain amount of use out of each gun before it breaks or jams, and it will be completely useless until you find another one. Yes, kids, this Polish Amiga first-person shooter from 1995 has weapon degradation. Isn't that fucking hilarious? Oh my god. Fortunately, for the most part, we're going to see plenty of weapons lying around the maps. One thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're picking up a fresh gun, say the pistol, for example, you're not adding ammo to your counter when you do so. You're literally just picking up a fresh gun to replace whichever one you've been using. So if you're running low on ammo, simply picking up a new gun is not going to do you much good. Ammo is ammo, guns are guns, and fortunately, since those are considered separate entities by the game, you're going to keep all the ammo that you pick up, regardless of whether or not you have a working weapon for it. So if your shotgun breaks, but you keep picking up shells, you're gonna have that much more ammo to use if and when you find another shotgun to aid you. Speaking of the hub, if you look down here at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice a number of messages scrolling by. This is going to happen anytime you pick up an item, or activate something, or run into a wall or a door. Some of the messages can be a little bit interesting. I'm not really sure if it's a translation error or what exactly is going on, but it's definitely from the perspective of the character, and sometimes when the character goes, "Ouch, mommy," it's a little bit, disconcerting. Speaking of running into things, doors. Doors are very neat. Now, I've already mentioned that all you have to do is approach a door and it will open on its own to allow you entrance. But the thing with the doors in Cytadela is that unless they are all the way open, they will still act as a solid surface and you won't be able to pass through them or shoot through them. This can result in some sometimes frustrating and sometimes comedic moments where the door is, for all intents and purposes, all the way open, but it hasn't actually finished opening, so you'll try to walk through it and instead get bounced off of it like a toddler at Chuck E. Cheese. Now, on the plus side, enemies are unable to shoot through the doors until they are all the way open as well. So, even though sometimes you may forget that you need to wait for the doors to be all the way open before you start firing, the enemies also need to do the same. In later stages, I definitely used the tactic of walking up to a door, waiting till it was all the way open, firing off a few pot shots, and then backing away so that the doors would immediately start closing, thus blocking the enemy's shots heading my way. Look, kids, in Cytadela, sometimes you gotta play slop. Alright, so, the dungeons. Look at this place. When I said earlier that this game was a fever dream, I fucking meant it. Every zone in Cytadela is going to feature 2 unique enemies for us to face, specific to that zone. Here, we've got these gun-armed muscle men in wrestling briefs, and fire-breathing piranha plants that cling to the ceiling. Cytadela immediately starts off on a disorienting foot, with strange enemies, dismembered bodies hanging about the environment, images of hollowed-out faces and eyes along the walls and pillars. Killing an enemy can and will result in blood splattered onto nearby walls, which can be a detriment if that blood accidentally winds up covering a switch that you absolutely have to trigger in order to progress through a level. That can doubly confound you if you're not paying close attention to the environment. Switches, as I mentioned before, can activate or deactivate doors, but that's not all they do. Sometimes a switch will cause a nearby wall to disappear, revealing new areas to explore, or enemies that will ambush you. Sometimes switches will cause teleporters to appear so that you can walk through them, and sometimes they'll lower a barrier so that you can collect important items like keycards. And those keycards, kids, oh, those keycards. I forgot to talk about the keycard counter down here in the HUD. There are 3 kinds: red, green, and blue. Some maps are going to have multiples of each color, and we're going to have to find the right keycard slot to put them into. But here's the devilish twist. Card slots don't indicate which color key they are going to accept. We have to find a card and experiment by attempting to place the card in the slot, which, by the way, we need to equip the card by pressing 8, 9, or 0 on the keyboard. Sometimes you'll find, say, a red card, but the card slot won't take it, meaning there's another key in the area to find. Sometimes you'll use the correct key in a key slot, but it will be the wrong card slot, meaning you just wasted a card because they are single use only, and now you no longer have the key you need to progress. And sometimes there will be card slots that are just simply broken, acting as false idols, and now you'll have to track down where the hell a working key card slot is. So off the bat, Cytadela has a lot going on. You're moving through deceptive, complex mazes, fighting enemies that can and will kill you way too quickly if you're not quicker on the draw. You've got guns that can and will break down from use, and you've got key cards that you can lose if you use them in the wrong spaces. On top of all of this, the game only allows you to save between maps, so you have to make it from start to finish in one run, meaning if you die or accidentally softlock yourself, which is far too fucking easy to do, that you will have spent upwards of 30 to 40 minutes wandering hallways, all for nothing, and you will have to start all the way over. I'm telling you kids all of this now because here in the dungeons, I was unaware of what was going on. Yeah, I'd read the manual, I'd read a little bit about the game online, and I knew that it was a devious death trap of a puzzle box, but I had no idea, no fucking idea, just how stressful and harsh of an environment I was walking into. Now, I'm talking very little about the dungeons themselves here, and I'm letting these visuals do the work for me, because the dungeons are, in the grand scheme of this game, a gentle, easy introduction to the mechanics of what we're going to be working with, and do not signpost at all how devious this fucking game can and will get. Then again, this teleporter here does drop you directly into a room full of monsters, and you have to drink like 6 bottles of booze to get out, so maybe not that gentle. But the dungeons are, for what it's worth, fairly straightforward, and are precisely what newcomers to the game need in order to understand what they're mostly in store for. Once we've beaten the dungeons, we come to the zone selection screen, which we will return to every time we reach the end of a zone. We have the power plant, the sewers, the laboratory, the prison, the stores, and the hangar. And once we've cleared all 6 of the outer zones, we gain access to the final zone, the command center. Now, something to note about each of these zones is that each one contains a piece of the annihilation bomb that we are building to destroy the Citadel. The bomb part is going to be located in the 3rd map of each zone right before the exit, so we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for it, because if we don't grab that piece before we leave the map, we won't be able to build the bomb at the end. And we can't go back to find it if we miss it, because we can't replay any of the zones once they've been completed. So no pressure, right? We only have access to 3 of the zones at first: the power plant, the sewers, and the laboratory. I'm not about to run through the sewers right off the bat, so we're gonna choose the power plant and see what we're in for. The power plant is our first real taste of what Cytadela has to offer. Right off the bat, we're gonna notice a wildly different aesthetic for this zone. Bright, vibrant, but subtly ominous. Random blood splatters the walls. There's alarm lights flashing everywhere. Nuclear radiation signs give us an indication of what kind of power is actually at play here. And there's various energy stations across the entirety of the zone that simply exist as set dressing to give a little extra character to our experience. We also get our first glimpse at how windows exist in this game, which, I mean, it's really simple. It's just a transparent texture that we can't pass through or shoot through, and despite the multiple attempts of multiple enemies, they can't shoot at you through the glass either. It's a very simple and subtle effect, one we'll see put to even more effective use later on in the game. But with this, it's clear to see the technical and creative prowess at work here from Virtual Design, which, when you take into account the technology they were working with, and the layers of textures and the sheer variety of textures being used for each zone, holy fuck, does this look absolutely amazing. Meanwhile, the atmosphere of the game is just as ominous as the visuals are, and this is due to a lack of in-game music. In a segment later, I'll discuss more of the technical limitations that Virtual Design was facing when building Cytadela, but one of the concessions that they made for the technology that they were working with was choosing to not have an in-game soundtrack. And honestly, this really works to the game's benefit. Wandering through the silent hallways, hearing the moaning and groaning of monsters in the distance, growing closer as you get closer to them, and then the sudden thundering sound of weapon fire whenever you are in combat, it really plays out and balances and actually enhances the dreamlike atmosphere that the visuals are already providing. I can only imagine what a soundtrack for this game would have sounded like, and honestly, I can't think of anything that would actually make this game feel more feverish and non-Euclidean than the silence does. Another note to make is that switches, barrels, doors, and enemies visually look different from zone to zone. Virtual Design took on the hefty task of creating entirely new textures and tile sets for every single zone in the game, which results in maps that genuinely feel authentically original each time you enter one. Even the enemies have their own unique animations, though some of them are built off of the same basic design. The power plant's 2 enemies are soldiers and engineers, who carry pistols and shotguns respectively. I love that it's the engineers who are carrying his shotguns. Like, engineer with a shotgun sounds like the name of an unreleased retro shooter with a 70s vibe. You know what I mean? Hey, puppet combo, where's engineer with a shotgun? Something I didn't mention in the previous chapter about basic gameplay are explosive barrels. Now, we're all familiar with explosive barrels. I don't need to explain how those work. One thing to keep in mind here is that their explosive radius is fairly limited and really only affects any enemies in the immediate vicinity. The explosion will, however, set enemies on fire, which is an instant kill. The flamer weapon does the exact same thing, which is just absolutely so fucking welcome in circumstances, where you don't really want to waste multiple shots when you're already unsure of how much longer you can use a gun. On the other hand, the downside is that enemies caught on fire will stand around for 30 seconds or so, slowly burning to death. So if you set something on fire in a narrow corridor or just on the other side of a door that you want to pass through, then you're going to have to stop and wait until it's done burning for you to pass. It's a really neat gameplay element, one that, much like the rest of Cytadela's gameplay elements, comes with pros and cons. Something beneficial to the player always has a cost of its own, a cost that you will constantly be measuring, and if you forget to measure it, the consequences could be catastrophic. From a design perspective, the power plant is one of the most straightforward zones in the entirety of the game. Switches are easy to find and decipher their workings, key cards and slots are effectively laid out so you don't feel like you're taking a huge risk by attempting to use a card in a slot, and aside from one or two surprises, and despite the fact that the maps of Cytadela are fucking huge, the power plant zone is quick, easy, and in my opinion, the best choice for players to start off on this campaign. Once we're done talking about all of this gameplay, I'll give you kids some links and insight on how to play this game nowadays on modern computers if you want to, but we've got to experience some shit first before we do that. Now, I don't have a lot to say here about the power plant because, again, this is as straightforward as the game gets. It's a great intro to the goings-on, and the aesthetics are frankly gorgeous and interesting. I was definitely slightly worried playing through it that I might be kind of bored going through this game. You know what I mean? I spent around half an hour clearing each map, so I'm at this point anticipating a fairly brisk playthrough of the whole thing. Light and easy and a few notes taken. Maybe I'll clear through the whole thing in a day or two. Yeah, a light fodder game for the channel. Well, the next zone that I picked was the blood. Where do I start with the blood sewers? Yes, the blood sewers. Now, in the map, they're simply referred to as the sewers, but as you kids can no doubt see from this footage, there is blood pouring out of grates, pipes, covering the walls, the floors, and one of the enemies is a nasty little shit that I have dubbed the Blood Phlegm. And I'm gonna go ahead right now and state that they are the deadliest and most annoying enemy in this game. This zone is one of the most chaotic, spiteful, deviously designed, and evilly executed episodes of any first-person shooter ever. Ever. I mean that, and I don't care. I don't care about any of cries of hyperbole here, because Look, I just spent a grand total of 20 hours playing Cytadela. 20 hours, and 6.5. 6.5 of those 20 hours were spent here trying to get through the blood sewers. Roughly one entire fucking third of this entire goddamn game was spent here in this one zone. Part of the problem, only part, but I mentioned this first for a reason, are the blood phlegms themselves. Now, at first I couldn't figure out why I was taking so much damage. Well, it's because the blood phlegms shoot power bolter blasts. The power bolter, mind you, is the Cytadela equivalent of the Doom plasma rifle, and is probably pound for pound the most powerful weapon in the game, without the consequences brought on from setting enemies on fire. Power bolter blasts do about 20 points of damage per shot. So for most other enemies in the game, 1 or 2 shots is enough to lay out pretty much anything in your path. But as mentioned earlier in this video, some enemies are immune to certain weapons. The blood phlegms, as I noticed unfortunately right away, are immune to the power bolter, which is really annoying because since the blood phlegm fires bolter blasts, the ammunition that they drop on death are batteries for the bolter. So I was just rife with power bolter ammo by the time I eventually left the blood sewers, because despite there being 2 enemy types here in the zone, the blood phlegms are far and away the most populous of the 2. Our second enemy is this werepillar. This fucking dude, who shoots shotgun blasts at us for a measly 5 points of damage. The design for this zone is fucking nuts, and while I am fascinated by it, and it sticks out in my head more than anything else in Cytadela, I absolutely hated every fucking second of this experience with every ounce of everything in my body. Lengthy, interminable hallways, sometimes punctuated by a blind corner or a switch which opens a door which may contain a much-needed health pack or possibly a werepillar. Sometimes vines droop across archways, skeletons hang from the ceiling, set decorations that obscure your view of whatever could be behind it. Sometimes lengthy hallways just don't exist. Sometimes it's corner after corner after corner, the most maze-like series of claustrophobic passages. Other times it's a large room, but the room is arranged with square pillars on a grid, behind which could be a score of blood phlegms, all of which are circling around trying to find you and kill you. And on very rare occasions, you'll find yourself in a large room to explore for switches and otherwise. But if you're in a large room like this, then you're probably surrounded by blood phlegms, too many to count. And while you're trying to shoot them, they're busy actively shooting at you. Most of the time in this game, enemies will start firing indiscriminately. And in other zones, this can be to your advantage because they will hit each other if they don't have a clear shot at you. Meaning you can line them up like dominoes potentially, and they will actually kill each other in their attempts to kill you. But the blood phlegms don't present this advantage because they're immune to the power bolter blasts, so if they do hit each other, it's not gonna do shit. And while most enemies can't shoot through other enemies, power bolter blasts have such a small hitbox that they can and will narrowly pass by other phlegms and hit you for damage, which is only a little unfair because you've suddenly dropped 100 hit points without warning, all because you had 1 phlegm directly in front of you, 2 behind it, and 2 behind you that you weren't aware of. Also, if the phlegms are choking a hallway that you're trying to get down and they're shooting at you, you can't simply strafe out of the way of incoming fire because the hallways aren't wide enough to do so. Your only hope here is to start firing when you think you're in range, land as many shots as possible, and kill them before they kill you. But even then, that's not the best strategy, because bolter blasts have a longer range than other weapons, so the phlegms are raining hell on your position on sight and far away. These little fuckers are miserable little snipers, and I hate them. Back in the dungeons, I explained to you kids the basics of colored keycards, of how there are one-way doors and switches that will sometimes lock doors instead of unlocking them. From point one here in the blood sewers. All 3 of those elements are being expertly executed by the devs. I ran the first map of this zone 4 times. The first time, I died. The second time, I accidentally soft-locked myself by walking through a one-way door that refused to let me back through. The third time, I soft-locked myself by stepping through a one-way door, remembering that it was a one-way door, and quickly backpedaled through the doorway before the door could shut, only to realize afterwards that it was, in fact, a one-time door that only opens if you approach it the first time, and after that, it remains locked. And on the 4th time, I carefully, cautiously inched my way through the map for over an hour, ensuring I had all the keys, the health, and the ammo to survive. My joy at finally finding that exit teleporter was tempered by the knowledge that I still had 2 more maps of this torture to run through. And without fail, those 2 maps caused me so many deaths, so many restarts, so many soft locks, that by the time I was knee-deep in my 3rd attempt at the 3rd map, looking around at this nonsense, this chaos, this meandering mess, I couldn't help but wonder, what the hell would Civvy have to say if he saw the blood sewers?
How the fuck did he find another one?
I want to take a break for a moment from my vitriol for this zone and compliment the ingenious and surgically precise level design here in the sewers. I mean this in all seriousness, that for every ounce of mean-spirited hatred that seems to emanate from these 3 maps, it is balanced by equal parts careful, measured calculations, meant in every way to keep the player thinking, keep them on their toes, and to provide what is essentially a large puzzle-based experience within a first-person shooter. While I had been suspicious of this next statement from the outset, Cytadela's sewers and experience afterwards really hammers home to me that this game is less of a Doom clone and more of an experience akin to the internet's most recent retro video game obsession, Baroque. Baroque, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a first-person dungeon-crawling RPG that first appeared on the Sega Saturn in 1998, and has since seen a number of remasters and remakes on other consoles. I'm not going to talk about it much here, other than to say if you want some fascinating deep dives into obscure and opaque games that don't always give you the full picture on what you need to do, go watch a couple videos on Baroque. I'll link my 2 favorites in the description. But the reason for that comparison here is that Baroque operates on obfuscated systems that don't offer themselves with clarity to the player immediately, but instead arise as a confusing, muddy experience that slowly unveils over time, eventually presenting the scope of the developer's details. Cytadela holds an aura of mystique, of something larger at work behind the scenes that you can't quite identify, of something great and terrible and overwhelming should you learn what it is. With the weapon degradation, the punishing difficulty of losing health if you so much as run into a wall, the character effects of drinking booze, and the obfuscated mystery of what will happen when you reach the center, Cytadela feels like a combination of Marathon and Stalker, in ways that just don't seem to make sense until you actually play it. And after seeing the blood sewers, I'm not sure that anyone is going to want to play it. The 3rd map of the blood sewers, the finale, was designed in such a way that the player needs to travel to all 4 cardinal points on the map, the huge fucking map, to unlock specific switches that operate doors and barriers on the opposite side of the map, to then travel through a series of teleporters to operate a series of switches, which then unlock a set of keys, which then need to be placed into a series of slots at the cardinal points of the map in order to unlock a series of keys, which then need to be slotted in the same positions as the teleporters we've run through in order to unlock 4 new teleporters, only one of which is the true exit. The other 3 drop you in the middle of a score of blood flames. There is no walkthrough for this game on the internet. I had to go through all of this on my own. I took notes, I drew maps, and I finally escaped the blood sewers. Now, while the sewers might have been the biggest pain in my ass throughout these proceedings, they were not, by any stretch, the last of the pain that I suffered here. Because at this point in the game, unbeknownst to me, I still had 10 more hours of gameplay to get through. 10! Here is where I first started to find some cracks in the design of this game. For example, and this is not necessarily the fault of the game, but probably of the fan translation that I played for this video, and more on that later, there are unfortunately a couple of maps in this game where, if you don't play the map on hard difficulty, the game will glitch, crash, and you won't be able to progress. Usually this happened within the first couple of minutes of gameplay, so not much progress was lost, but it was still a bit of a frustrating bit to have to play through these maps on hard just to ensure that I could actually play the game itself. The labs have scientists in hazmat suits and strange mutated enemies. Scientists carry bolters, mutants carry shotguns. So far so good. I really like the aesthetics here. A very welcome change from the drab, miserable experience of the sewers. Purple walls, chamber doors sealed over with ice, hedge mazes overrun with vines, and these little snapper plants that don't cause any harm. They're just here for set dressing. Oh, look at them, they're such good boys. The labs are pretty straightforward in the first couple of maps as well, save for a silly little puzzle where you could accidentally use more than one of the same colored key card in one of 2 side-by-side slots, thinking that you might need to put a card in both, but you only need to put a card in one of them. That's all well and good. Great. Soft locked again. Restart the map. Don't make the same mistake. It was the 3rd map of this zone that hurt my whole core to the bone. The level is a series of separate rooms all within a giant floor. The way to get inside these rooms and travel between them is to solve a complicated teleporter puzzle. This teleporter puzzle will pop you back and forth to what can sometimes feel like random places, but mostly will dump you into the same narrow, twisty blue hallway that you have to make your way through in order to exit back out to the main floor, or choose a teleporter to send you to a specific spot on the map and try your luck again. I mapped out every single teleporter in this level. I noted where they took me, and I set myself a path to find the keycards I needed in order to open up the center and find the exit. And now I could see through the final locked doors to where my exit was. I saw the bomb part I needed to pick up and the exit. But the problem was that no matter where I went or what teleporters I went through, I could not figure out which switches were the switches to switch those doors into an unlocked status. And the problem here is that your run speed is so slow, and the teleporters are so far apart. And the switches are so far apart that experimenting with switches can take anywhere up to 5 minutes at a time just to cross the length of the map in order to try another combination and then maybe, just maybe, get the right teleporter to beam you over to where you need to be. I spent a good 2 hours on this one map alone. And I've already mentioned that there is no walkthrough that you can find online for this game, and it is this fucking map that had me scouring forums and chat rooms to try and find one. What I did find, however, were cheat codes. Oh, blessed cheat codes. Don't look at me like that, kids. I wanted to finish this game, and after 2 hours on one map alone, I think I put in enough time to earn this. Now, however, the cheat code for skipping a map just allows you to skip the map straight up. No added benefits. That means that skipping this third map in the labs meant I couldn't pick up the bomb part that I needed in order to eventually assemble the annihilation bomb for the finale. Thankfully, one of the other cheat codes in my list was to give me all of the bomb parts at once, so I figured, you know what? Fine. I will skip this map. I will leave this one bomb piece, and I will gather up the rest of the bomb pieces and use the bomb code after I've gotten the other bits. Fine. I can live with that.
I can live with it.
Holy shit, the prison! Whatever is happening in the Citadel seems to all be isolated to individual zones of the facility. The sewers are overrun with blood phlegms, the labs are overrun by mutants, the power station seems to be barely keeping the place from exploding, and here, we're walking into the middle of a full-on prison riot. Red alert lights going off, barred doors blown open that we can pass through, dead bodies littering the ground, dead bodies strung from the ceiling. The prison is absolute chaos. Our two enemies here are inmates and prison guards. The inmates are carrying pistols while the guards are using fucking flamers, which is going to cause a lot of pain if we don't get ourselves out of the line of fire. I'm at odds with the design work for the prison, because visually and aesthetically, this is a marvel. Virtual design put a lot of work into this zone to really hammer home that there is some serious shit happening on the Citadel, alongside the highest volume of enemies we've seen yet, even more than the sewers. The prison also isn't as limited as the sewers in navigation, with more open environments, so this allows for even more enemy placement. We are really, truly running and gunning here in the prison. This also genuinely feels like a prison, with multiple cells, prison toilets, even posters of naked women in some of the stalls, which is, well, I can't show you kids, but I'm convinced the pinup is a crude Amiga 500 scan of an early 90s European Playboy model. But where the vibes and visuals really come together to make a unique and fascinating series of maps to run through, Virtual Design's dedication to making the prison feel like as much of a prison as possible also hinders the momentum and the progression a little bit. With the number of individual cells and private restrooms within the prison, this means that we're going to be walking down lengthy hallways with doors on either side of us, checking each door for ammo or health, often finding enemies lying in wait, and it's always at the very end of these halls that we find a key card to use somewhere else. And then we get to trudge all the way back to the start of the hall in order to find another hall full of cells to walk down and repeat the process. Meanwhile, nothing can physically prepare you for the maze that is map 2 of the prison. This is a genuine masterpiece of tomfoolery. You see, the prison bars are all transparent textures so that they appear just like barred doors and walls in an actual prison. You can see through them. But when we have this maze, where we have to go through an entire cell block, trying to decipher which are the walls that have been blown outward, which are the doors that will open on our approach, which doors will lock behind us once we've stepped through, and once we've made it through the maze, how then do we utilize the keycards we found in the proper manner corner so we don't soft lock ourselves. There's even 4 red herring keycards within the cell maze itself, which made me think I had to find some way of picking them up, but no! They're all just sitting there without a way to be collected, a tease by the developers. With the number of doors to open, the number of cells to explore for items, plus the visually disorienting maze that you absolutely have to cross-reference with your map to ensure you don't take a wrong turn, Map 2 of the prison took me an hour and a half to complete. And I thought Wrath's missions were big. But despite that, the prison is one of the most attention-grabbing zones in this game. I would even say in any game I've ever played. I was sucked in from point 1, even when I was fatigued from checking yet another prison cell just to be denied a keycard. And I was invested in completing these maps all in one run, no startovers, defying the maze and the riot going on all around me. Virtual Design definitely needed to trim this down a little and edit these maps so they weren't so, frustrating, but it's hard to really criticize how frustrating something is when it draws you in like this. I appreciated the frustration in a way that I couldn't with the sewers, in a way that I couldn't with the final map of the laboratory. The prison is probably the apex of the scope that Virtual Design was going for. This zone feels like the purest Cytadela experience. Obtuse without being too demanding of players to pay attention to 30 switches, maze-like without feeling as though it takes too long to retreat from a wrong turn, and action-packed without feeling like enemies will unfairly overwhelm you. Now, these last 2 zones, I'm combining into one chapter, because both of them felt like they ran from one to the other pretty smoothly, so I'm not going to have too much to say about them individually. Both of these zones are essentially gauntlets, made mostly notable by their enemies. In the stores, we've got workers and these, what the fuck? These flying heads prove yet again that Virtual Design is doing some really neat work with Cytadela, although I can't help but notice that they look almost exactly like facehuggers with some modifications. And the hangars have soldiers and Judge Dredd murder robots. It does kind of feel like a little bit of a cop-out to lump these 2 zones together into one brief examination, because they're each more than the sum of their parts while simultaneously representing the lesser aspects of Cytadela's design. The stores themselves are fine. I don't have any notes on this zone. In fact, I cleared through all 3 maps in less than an hour, which is probably why I don't have any notes here. It's the flying head enemies, burping out fireballs and hovering in place that stand out the most. There also aren't too many devious tricks that the game plays as far as preventing progression. I can think of one moment where there's a one-way door that soft locks you if you walk through it, but you haven't picked up the key card you need for the door past it, but that's really all I can think of. It's the hangars, and the fact that the stores plus the hangars are a 1-2 punch of spraying and praying your way through that make this last little bit before the end sloggier gameplay than it really needed to be. Now, of course, if you kids play this game, you don't have to choose the exact same lineup of zones the way I did. In fact, I highly recommend that you play the stores before the prison, then go into the hangar. It'll be a lot easier, a lot gentler, and you might end up having more ammo than I did, because you're going to need it for the hangar. The murder bots are immune to flamer blasts, so there's no relying on one-hit kills when your ammo is low, or if you're worried that your weapons are going to jam. And there's so many murder bots and so many soldiers that there is a very strong chance that at least 1, if not 2, of your guns are going to jam. By the time I eventually left the hangars, I only had a flamer and a power bolter, and the power bolter was out of ammo. The final map of the hangars is right up there with the final map of the labs, with a bunch of switches so far apart that it takes a full minute to travel back and forth just to see if any of these switches have had any effect on the doors you're trying to go through. And the enemies are so plentiful that I eventually just stopped and took stock and decided that my mental health was better served by just skipping out of this map. And it was the last map too, which meant that I did not get the bomb part for that, to which I also said, fuck it, I'm 19 hours deep at this point. 19 hours of this shit. Now you kids are probably saying to yourselves, 19 to 20 hours of gameplay is bare minimum what we expect from games these days, but I say unto thee, kids, not like this. Not like this. You see, by this point, Cytadela was giving me stress dreams. The initially casual gameplay of running a map in half an hour and then saving afterwards was fine, but these fucking adulterous, sinister, complex hour-and-a-half long experiences where you can't back out and you can't make a mistake or else you'll have to start the entire endeavor over, all while slowly meandering at exactly the same pace, only able to turn in certain directions at any time, opening doors, running into doors, trying to shoot enemies before they can shoot you, swapping weapons every other combat encounter to try and keep your guns fresh and not jam up when you least expect it. After 19 fucking hours of this nonsense, I was dreaming in Cytadela. I was dreaming about my day job and only being able to move like I was playing Cytadela, and I couldn't stop because this fucking game had finally gotten to me. So, yes, I put in the code to get all the bomb parts. I put in the code to skip the last map of the hangars. And wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you fucking know it? Somehow, Cytadela saved its weirdest, most jarring visuals for the very end. What the fuck? What the fuck? Virtual design. These fucking Polish mad lads populated the final mission with stormtroopers, Mandalorians, and classic Star Wars Imperial design aesthetics. This was... I was thoroughly unprepared for this. I was unfucking prepared. Kids, up until now, as you know, I'd seen some shit. I'd seen some wild, strange, forsaken imagery that I don't know I've ever seen in anything ever. And I said it earlier, but fuck hyperbole. This game is fucking weird. And here, in the final moments of the game, the last gasp, Cytadela doubles down on all of that weirdness by essentially making this entire experience a Star Wars game. The pixelated 8-bit Boba Fett enemies are fucking hilarious to look at, firing shotguns at you, but the stormtroopers? For the first time in a video game, the stormtroopers are actually crazy dangerous because they're carrying power bolters, and their aim is unfortunately really good in these narrow hallways. The command center is only one map, and it isn't too difficult to run through. Activate a bunch of switches to open a couple of specific doors. No traps, just flick them all on. Grab some key cards, put them in slots. Be careful though, there is one rogue slot that I avoided intentionally because I didn't want to accidentally fuck anything up. Then take a teleporter to another area, but don't go back into the teleporter without grabbing the nearby key card because otherwise you'll soft lock yourself. Like I did. Okay, but in all sincerity, the command center is a very straightforward map. It's almost like a reward. Like, here you go. You survived Cytadela. You've made it this far. Now all you have to do is fight your way through the end. And there we go. I really do appreciate how here at the very end, there's one last bottle of booze that you have to pick up on your way out. Which, in a way, kind of feels like a bit of a middle finger from the developers, but then I realized it makes the screen shake to simulate the bomb going off behind you, which is kind of fucking hilarious. And then, at long last, the ending cinematic. Our character finds a small spacecraft called a boaster, which could be a mistranslation for a booster, I think. And we take off as the bomb explodes, destroying the Citadel. But there's no hero's ending here for us. Nope. In a bleak, nihilistic monologue, our character talks about the weight of knowing that he is the only surviving member of an expedition of thousands of people, of knowing that he'll never know the true nature of what was happening on the Citadel, and that he's floating through space alone, unaware of whether or not anyone is going to pick up his transmission for help. And considering the government's directness in making sure the Citadel was wiped clean from the books, maybe our pilot won't ever receive help. A suicide mission, forever kept quiet in the logs of Black Ops. Jesus Christ. Cytadela ends on the kind of note that few games could get away with. But throughout this entire experience, it's always kind of felt like there wouldn't be a happy ending to our adventure. This isn't Wolfenstein or Doom or Quake. There's no beat the final boss and escape back to home. This was a weird, solitary, strange journey through a fever dream that continually changed all around us, never once providing any solace or reason for our journey through it. The only agency we had here was choosing where to go within the Citadel, but even in pushing forward, there was no way for us to go backwards. Nothing is explained here, not in the manual or in the game itself. Whatever was happening at the Citadel is left a mystery, lost in the explosion of the annihilation bomb. It's left entirely open to interpretation to us as players, and I genuinely like that. The dreamlike atmosphere is partly why I compared it to Baroque earlier in the video, because that game has a similar vibe through and through. Certainly, if there's any modern game that I would compare this to, it would be Hrot. Hrot and Cytadela are very different games from both gameplay and graphical comparisons, but if you play them both, then you'll understand that they have exactly the same vibes. Ominous, insidious, oppressive atmospheres that offer no enlightenment. You simply have to wade through the strange sights and weird sounds and try not to go mad from it all. Cytadela is a great game. A great game. made from passionate, talented developers who clearly threw everything they had into the production. And it shows, but it also suffers from a lack of editing and refinement in places. Sure, the devilish puzzles and switch hunting sometimes come together into a surgically intense experience that makes sense on all ends, but other times it's a foggy slog through unintuitive thought processes hampered by slower movement than in other games. There were parts that I marveled at, and parts that made me want to quit entirely. I simultaneously love this game, and I want to go through it all again and write down a detailed walkthrough for other gamers, but I also never want to replay certain missions ever again. Cytadela is a lost gem, one that I think is important in the annals of retro shooter history. It was fully independently developed, it was passionately pursued, and, in a fantastic little twist that I'm happy to have saved for last, it was created entirely by teenagers. In 1993, a bomb dropped on the world of gaming. Doom, the little game that still keeps on giving today. But to a group of 4 Polish teenagers in 1993, Doom was the key to a project that would end up netting them national fame. Not for reasons we would hope for in this situation. Originally known in the Amiga demo scene as a group called Suspect, composer Artur Opala and artist Artur Bardowski were introduced to programmer Pavel Martusz at a computer fair held at the Railwayman's house in Gdynia. A friend of Opala and Bardowski's regaled the lads with stories of Martusz's coding tricks, and they showed off some of his work with a computer that was on hand. Opala and Bardowski lost their shit seeing what the teenage programmer was capable of, and immediately set out to meet up with Martusz and made him a member of Suspect. When Doom appeared on the market, several so-called experts made it known loud and clear that it would be an impossible project to make a shooter of that kind on an Amiga, due to the way that images were displayed on PC. Martusz called this opinion, quote, bullshit, and set out to build a graphics engine capable of emulating Doom's look and feel. In what should be noted in FPS history, right beside John Carmack's id Tech and Ken Silverman's build engine, Pavel Martusz created a graphics engine more than capable of similar visual feats on an Amiga 500, and he did so in just under a couple of weeks. A couple of fucking weeks. Now, I don't know how familiar you kids are with Amiga computers and their technology. When it comes to the subject, I'm absolutely Jon Snow, and I know nothing. But I can tell you that from what I've gathered, the Amiga 500 was essentially the 386 of the Amiga scene. So by 1994, there were much more powerful models on the market for consumers. Amiga 500 was the baseline that these kids were operating with, and for them moving forward, it would become the bare minimum requirement for their technology and game to run on. In fact, they were so determined to ensure that their game would run on a 500 that they made concessions and sacrifices, such as not having in-game music in order to fulfill that promise. The graphics for the engine test were done by Radek Czechaka, who also became a member of Suspect by default with his work here. Bardowski was so hyped by the engine test that he started conjuring ideas for a full-fledged retail product, something to set themselves apart and away from the demo scene. The rest of the group knew that they had to make a major move in order to distance themselves from their previous work, so to underscore their series project, they founded the developer studio Virtual Design, and development on the game known as Cytadela began. There isn't a whole lot of information I've been able to find on the subject of development, mostly anecdotes from an interview with Artur Opala. He spoke on how they worked on the game for just over a year, in between school, social events, and generally farting around with teenage tomfoolery. Opala described their development time as the work of enthusiasts, with no one standing over their shoulders telling them what to do or how to do it, with no time constraints. Virtual Design was a group on fire creating Cytadela, and the work was enough to impress retail publisher Arrakis, who bought the rights to the game to be distributed domestically within Poland, and struck a deal with publisher Black Legend, who bought the rights to distribute the game internationally in the UK. For Virtual Design, everything was coming up Milhouse, except for the fact that they didn't get paid. Cytadela, for all intents and purposes, sold numbers in Poland, as well as the UK and in Germany, but Arrakis wasn't paying out royalties to Virtual Design. After some back and forth talks that didn't go anywhere, eventually Virtual Design made the decision to sue Arrakis for both their royalties, as well as the return of all the rights to Cytadela. And then, kids, I'm at a loss for this little tidbit of information here. What happened next was the head of Arrakis Publishing, a man reportedly by the name of Oscar, brought his mother to represent him in court during the proceedings. I shit you not. He brought his mother to represent him in court. Kids, I love you. You know that. But if you ever end up in court for any reason, for God's sake, get a real lawyer and don't use your mommy. Anyways, to make a long story short, the proceedings were interesting enough to attract Polish news outlets, to a degree where the lads of Virtual Design were recognized from the case while doing some side work as suspect, which, unfortunately, would be the biggest brush with fame that would result from the creation of Cytadela. At the end of the court proceedings, Virtual Design won back the rights to Cytadela, and aieeee was ordered to pay the team their royalties. But there was one problem. aieeee was broke. Dead broke. So Virtual Design made no money from the release of their game, and essentially disbanded after the fact. Sure, individually they would go on to work on other projects, but Virtual Design itself would never make another game together as a group. They tried, certainly, with 2 projects that just couldn't get off the ground, including a planned sequel to Cytadela known as Stronghold, but it was just never meant to be. I'll tell you what they did do, though. They made the game files free to download on the internet. And that is how we are able to do what we're doing today. So, admittedly, it took some doing to capture what you've been watching on the screen while I talked about the history of the game. I started fiddling around first with a fan-made PC translation of the game from 2010 that I got from SourceForge. And you can too. It's super easy to download and you don't have to install anything. You just need to run the exe file and that's it. Game on. Seems super simple, right? Well, for reasons that I don't understand, because I'm not a tech head and none of my research could find any fixes for this, playing the fan translation in full screen mode made it so that I could see the intro cinematic and the main menu in full widescreen at first. But if I completed a map or tried to go back to the main menu, the screen would just turn black. This is because both the main menu and the cinematics are in 640 by 480 resolution, and they don't scale with my settings once I started the gameplay. Gameplay always ran fine in widescreen no matter what I did, so I could see what I was doing, and it controlled really well, but attempting to save, or simply utilize the main menu, resulted in seeing nothing but black. So my next option was, why don't I try to use an Amiga emulator to run the original game? Which worked. Moderately. See, I'm so unfamiliar with Amiga technology that attempting to emulate Amiga systems on my modern PC resulted in comically inaccurate run speeds and frame rates. However, after dialing in the settings to something more palatable, it ended up running super slow with clunky controls that I just couldn't figure out how to remap without a dedicated programming degree under my belt. So I went back to the PC fan translation and tried playing the game again, this time in windowed mode. Sure enough, I was able to play the game, see the menu and cinematics, and also the gameplay with ease. Now, since I was recording footage by capturing the specific window and not the desktop, it doesn't look jarring for you kids watching at home. And I've altered my footage slightly so the menu and cinematics can fill your personal screens a little bit more. But just for shits and giggles, take a gander at the unaltered footage. The things I'm willing to work with for this channel. I also had to work around the fact that when playing the game in windowed mode, the mouse will consistently move off the window if you're using the mouse to look around. The fan translation here has native WASD and mouse support, so playing the game in full screen with mouse and keyboard is a breeze, but the moment it's windowed, trying to turn too far left or too far right will inadvertently result in your mouse cursor appearing at the edge of the window, halting your turn, and you have to manually reset the mouse in order to get back to it. So, get this. I ditched the mouse and played the game with WASD to move and strafe, and I used arrow keys to turn left and right. Meanwhile, spacebar operated switches, and the shift key fired my weapons. And what's doubly interesting there is that all the weapons, except for the machine gun, all need individual key presses to fire their weapons. So I was hitting that shift key a lot. What was I saying about the things I do for this channel? And finally, I absolutely couldn't resist showing you here the opening logos from the Amiga version of the game. Specifically because these logos and the music accompanying them is just incredible, and it doesn't show up at the opening of the PC fan game. Oh man, that's some solid 90s work. There is still yet one more option for playing the game today, one that is readily available for those who utilize Amigas still or emulate Amiga tech on their PCs. And that is the remastered version of Cytadela, which released for free from Virtual Design themselves. Titled Cytadela Remastered, this remaster updates the graphics and gameplay ever so slightly to make the game a little smoother to experience, provided by two of the original members of Virtual Design. It's kind of rad and a little shocking that the designers could come back 30 years later, remaster their own work from when they were in their teens, and then just drop it onto the internet literally for free. The files for Cytadela have been free to the public for a long time anyway, but a free remaster of a hidden gem like this, just put out there for free? If there's anything that truly solidifies the fact that this was a game born of passion and enthusiasm, then I have to say it's this right here. Cytadela is a wonderful game that doesn't nearly get the recognition that it should. Partly, this is because it was developed for Amiga, and has primarily been an Amiga game despite the fan translation I played. It's also due in part to the fact that the developers were denied the chance to really sell their game outside of Poland and of Europe thanks to what was essentially a corrupt publisher. The game is flawed. The game is fundamental, but it experiments with such passionate confidence that I can't help but marvel at some of the tricks that it pulls. After all of this, Cytadela for me is a 7.5 out of 10. It's hard for me to recommend this game on a general basis, because as I've already said, there's a lot of slogging through it. There's no saving mid-mission, and it's far too easy to get soft-locked on some of these maps. But for those of you who want to give it a go, I highly recommend at least attempting it, because this is unlike anything you've ever played. I guarantee it. Thank you, kids, for coming along this journey with me. I really wasn't sure what I was getting into with this one. Now, you're no doubt watching the supporter credits roll right now, and looking at how much time there is still left in the video, and you're thinking to yourselves, wait, Dad, this can't be over yet. Why are you rolling the credits? Well, kids, that's because in a bit of self-indulgence, I decided that I wanted to add here at the very end my biggest personal triumph in this game. In a minute here, you're going to see a super clean, nearly flawless run through the final map of the Blood Sewers. It's close to 20 minutes long, and I'll understand if you don't want to watch the whole thing. That's why I put it here at the end. But man, am I proud of this, because it represents hours of attempts and multiple runs through this map, and me taking so many notes so that I could know step by step exactly how to get through this thing. And I feel like this 20-minute escapade allows all of you to just see how twisted and how devious and how mean not only the sewers are, but how the whole of Cytadela can be. Now, thank you all so much for watching, for being here. Check out my Patreon in the description if you'd like to help support my channel and future videos. Like and share and subscribe, all of that YouTube jazz. Now, sit up straight, eat your vegetables, and always stay hydrated. I'll see you next time. Oh. 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 Bye.